Yo, what's good everyone? The Google Pixel 7 and 7 Pro have finally been released, and I've been waiting for this phone ever since the initial leaks and teasers. At first glance, they look very similar to the Pixel 6 series, just with some subtle changes. But I am really loving this dark gray color combo with the chrome-like finish on the camera bar. Although I've had the chance to use the Pixel 7 Pro for a few days, this is by no means a full comprehensive review. Honestly, it's just not enough time with the device for me to provide an honest long-term review. There are certain quirks and nuances that you may not find out until you are 1 or 2 months into using the actual device. And as a photographer, I find myself shooting with my phone more and more often as the cameras keep getting better. This year, Google upgraded the ultrawide and the telephoto lens on the Pixel 7 Pro, so I'm really excited to test those out. In this video, I'll be showing you guys the POV segment where I go out on the streets and shoot with the Pixel 7 Pro and show you guys what it's like shooting with this device in real life conditions. Then there'll be social media examples from Snapchat and Instagram because Google mentioned that they work closely with these companies in order to optimize the camera experience. And lastly, it's not a true photographer's review without diving into Lightroom. This is where we will be able to pixel peep, zoom in on the photos at 100% in order to see just how well these cameras hold up on a large display. Because honestly, most phones are able to take great pictures that look great when you're just posting to social media or looking at it on a small screen. But in order to really see just how well the camera system performs, you have to pixel peep and look at those details. Alright, now let's jump right into the POV footage. Alright, what's good everyone? I'm starting off this POV segment with a front video selfie test. And today in New York, it's relatively overcast with a ton of background noise around me. So this is a great test for the cameras on less than ideal conditions, as well as a test for the microphone to see just how well it picks up my voice. Looking at the phone screen, the front camera looks pretty good. It definitely looks like an improvement over the Pixel 6 Pro, but it's hard to say until we look at the footage on the computer. At this first location, I immediately wanted to test out the 5x telephoto, so I tried zooming in on the train as it was approaching the station. Unfortunately, the angle where I was standing didn't quite work out in terms of photo compositions, but I was still really surprised by the amount of detail it was able to resolve. But this new 5x telephoto still has its quirks because in this example, I launched the camera quickly, switched to the 5x lens, and took this image. As you can see, it is super blurry because the phone did not have enough time to actually switch over and use that 5x telephoto. Around the block, I like the architecture of this building with the warm tones contrasting against that cold blue glass. Someone was walking towards me in a blue shirt, and the food cart on the right also had some warm tones. So overall, I thought the colors came together nicely. Then I shifted the phone up and used the 2x option to take a photo of the facade of the building. And at first glance, I was really impressed with this shot because I thought that there would be some kind of over sharpening or something to let me know that it was a digital zoom. Moving on, I used the wide angle for this shot because I wanted to capture the person walking towards me along with the dramatic angle of the buildings and the street. I'm happy to report that the ultrawide was very responsive and it snapped a shot instantly. At this next corner, I saw the sky bridge a couple of blocks down. So once again, I used that 5x telephoto in order to try and capture a couple of those images. I am really surprised by this zoom lens because it's a roughly 230mm equivalent in your pocket. You're able to capture some really amazing shots with that compression. And one of my favorites from this street corner was this vertical composition where I was able to single out this one person on that skywalk. Editing the photo and using Magic Eraser was super easy to remove any distractions. I also did a social media test here with Snapchat on the left and Instagram on the right. So this is just a video with some quick panning and zooming. You can see that the zoom is definitely jerky as it switches from lens to lens. However, I'm happy to say that every lens does seem to be supported, and you're able to zoom in all the way using the native social media apps. If you haven't already, definitely follow me on Instagram at az.visuals so that you can be one of the first to see these images and stories when they go up, and you can see the quality for yourself. At this next location, I am standing in front of this intersection and using the ultrawide to capture this shot of the guy crossing the street with his dog. The crazy perspective of this image looks really cool, and having that new, wider 13mm equivalent lens is awesome. Next, I'm just going to go up through the zoom range and capture a photo with each option. I'm happy to report that most of these images look very similar in terms of white balance and color. Although there are still some slight variations, I hope Google can improve in future software updates. As you can see here, once you reach the 30x super zoom option, the phone is able to stabilize and lock focus on a specific portion of the frame. That's really useful, but once it locks on, it's extremely difficult to move away from that focus point and basically recompose your shot. And this is one of those examples where you wouldn't really get from reading a spec sheet, and it's something that you would only find out through real world experience, which is why I love posting these POV segments so that you can actually see what it's like shooting with this device. Moving on further down the block, I used this opportunity to do another social media test. This time, I'm comparing the image taken with the regular 1x camera against Snapchat and Instagram. I'm happy to report that they all were able to render the scene very similarly, although the aspect ratios vary greatly. Next, I found this location with a bunch of graffiti and posters plastered up on this green wall. This is a great scene to test the phone's ability to render those finer details and see if there's any strange over-sharpening going on. By going through the entire zoom range, I'm very impressed with these photos. The colors look vibrant, the textures are crisp, and nothing looks out of the ordinary. It's not even like I'm shooting in great lighting because this is under a covered scaffolding and on an overcast day. Lastly, I was able to test out the macro mode, and you can see I had to get so close to the wall I was practically touching it with my hand, and the phone was still able to capture this shot. So here you can see I'm using action pan on the wide angle camera, and I was able to capture the red car as it drove past. Then I tried again using the 1x camera on this truck, and I got the front of the truck perfectly in focus. As I mentioned in my Pixel 6 Pro review, I love these software features like action pan and long exposure. Although it may seem like a gimmick, having these options in your device just make it so much more fun to shoot and allows you to capture some images that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Then I walked a couple more steps, and action pan was actually able to capture the train and blur that as well. I even tried it at night, and I think it looks even cooler because all the lights are blurred and it gives a completely different vibe. Here's an example of long exposure taken at night where it tried to blur the water, and I think it did a decent job. Speaking of night, let's switch over to the nighttime POV. At this first location, I'm standing on the dock shooting towards the buildings. We can see night mode automatically kicked in. And wow, this first image just looks amazing. The colors are vibrant, and you can even see the blue sky and white clouds even though it was very dark out. Then I used the 5x telephoto, and I did not expect it to actually work because I thought it would be too dark. After reviewing this image, I was once again really surprised by the results. There is so much detail, and you can even make out the individual leaves on those trees. However, the telephoto does have a pretty big vertical flare for bright lights, and this may ruin some night shots. Just for fun, I even tried the 30x zoom here, and as I expected, the image looks pretty terrible, but it's definitely not the worst that I've seen. I even tried to take a couple of photos of the moon, and as you can see from the shots, there's just no detail and it looks like a watercolor painting. But overall, I'm still extremely impressed with these night mode photos, and I feel like these just keep improving with each generation. For example, this cityscape shot is something that I would be able to take with my full frame mirrorless camera, and I never would have imagined being able to take something like this with just my phone. And look at the clarity and color reproduction with the telephoto lens. I also tried a nighttime social media test. So here we have Snapchat on the left with Instagram on the right. And you can see both of these are looking pretty grainy. There's also some lag as I'm panning around. and it's extremely jumpy when you try to zoom in. However, I'm still happy to see that you're able to use all of these lenses in social media apps even at night. And because it's all software, hopefully the quality can be improved in future updates. But here's where things get a little iffy. This old car caught my attention and I really liked the rustic scene. So initially the phone was exposing way too bright, so I had to manually adjust the slider to tone it down. This first shot looks okay, but it was still too bright for my taste. I wanted a more contrasty and moodier shot, so I further lowered the brightness slider. On the phone screen, it looked close to what I had wanted, but after reviewing the image on my computer, you can see that it's definitely underexposed. This is just another example of one of those times where I wish Google would give us manual controls so that we can set our own exposure according to the scene. But with a quick edit in post, you can easily adjust these photos to your style. Alright, so now that we're done with the POV segment, let's dive into Lightroom, where we pixel peep at these images at 100%. And if you're still watching, I really appreciate you. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to support my channel. These videos take a ton of time and effort to create, so I would really appreciate the support. Alright, now we're in Lightroom and we're starting off with the brick wall test. By no means is this scientific, but this is a great and easy test that I perform with all of my lenses just to get a quick view of how it performs to see if there's any decentering, smearing at the corners, vignetting, and any other issues like that. This first image is from the ultra-wide camera, and right off the bat you can see that it doesn't look too great. The white balance is shifted towards blue, and the color of the brick is definitely not true to life. But zooming in reveals a good amount of detail, and you can still make out the irregularities and the cracks in the brick. I am most impressed by the corner performance, because although there is very slight vignetting, it's really not that noticeable, and there's no significant smearing or loss of detail. But I'll dive more into this later when we go over some raw pictures, but let's move on to a photo from the main camera. Immediately you can see a shift in the white balance. The colors are richer, more vibrant, and more accurate. Flipping back and forth, you can definitely see that difference. Zooming in at 100% reveals a lot of detail. You can see all of the fine textures on the face of the brick as well as the nuanced color differences. The main sensor is the same from the Pixel 6 Pro, and I loved it when I reviewed that phone, so this is just as good. Moving into the new 5x telephoto lens, you can see once again the colors are a bit different from that main camera. Zooming in at 100%, you can see just as much detail as the main camera, and nothing looks over-sharpened or over-processed. Usually with telephotos on phones, I find that there is a lot of over-sharpening going on, but I'm happy to see that this isn't the case with the Pixel 7 Pro. Alright, now onto some real-world examples. This image was shot using the 5x telephoto lens, and you can see in overcast conditions, the shutter speed is slow enough where you can capture natural motion blur, as seen in the subway car. This is one instance where I wish Google would just give us those manual controls in order for us to control our own shutter speed. So this is definitely something you should be aware of if you're using the telephoto lens and trying to capture fast-moving subjects. Here's another shot using the same lens, and you can see all of those fine details like the individual wires and the rivets in the metal. The color reproduction looks really good here, and even shooting against that bright gray sky, I don't see any fringing or chromatic aberrations. This shot was taken with the 2x digital zoom setting. Because Google said that the 2x option is almost as good as an optical 2x lens, I really wanted to test it out for myself. Because the 2x is roughly equivalent to a 50mm full frame lens, which is one of my favorite focal lengths to shoot. At first glance, this image looks great, and even when zooming in at 100%, the image still looks just as good. If you had told me this was shot with a 2x optical lens, I probably would have believed you, because I don't see any evidence of digital processing. This next example is also taken with the 2x option, but this scene is much more complicated. Zooming into the middle of the frame, you can see everything still looks really good. The text on the sign is clear, and you can even vaguely make out the features on the guy's face. Looking around the frame, however, you can see there is slight sharpening going on, and some areas are muddier. So I guess it really depends on the scene and how the phone processes the shot. Now let's check out an example taken with the ultra-wide lens. At first glance, the colors and white balance look really good here, and zooming in at 100%, everything is still sharp, even at the edge of the frame. The ultrawide is upgraded this year to roughly a 13mm full frame equivalent, which is extremely wide. The widest lens that I own is 12mm, so this is nearly as wide as that. I love this upgrade over the previous generation because I mentioned that the ultrawide on the Pixel 6 Pro just felt a little too narrow. Now pay attention to the Altus building in the middle of the frame because this next shot is taken with the 30x super res zoom. Every time I shoot with the telephoto lens on smartphones, I'm always blown away, and this is no exception. The 30x zoom is roughly equivalent to a 230mm lens on a full frame camera. So it's crazy how you can go from 13mm on the wide end all the way to 200+ millimeters at the telephoto end. That's just crazy how you can have access to that all in your smartphone. Anyway, the quality is not perfect, but it still looks really good for a digital zoom of this distance. But the ability to even resolve details like the antennas and the railings of the building is really impressive for a digital zoom. Next, I want to dive deeper into that 2x option and compare the differences between using the 2x and something else that's not on that magical 2x number, like a 2.1x. So this shot was taken with the 2x camera, and you can see there's tons of great colors and textures in this frame. Now this next shot is taken with the 2.1x zoom, and you can see it is slightly cropped in more. As I was comparing these images back and forth, it was really hard to find any major differences. There might be slightly more detail in the 2x shot, and you can see some of that detail in the exposed glue on the white paper. But it is so nitpicky, and it could just be biased because the 2x shot is supposed to be better. Alright, now let's pixel peep at some of these night photos. The first image was taken using the ultrawide, and viewing it in full, it looks really awesome. You can see the clouds in the sky, the colors in the streetlights are vibrant, and the buildings all look nice and sharp. But when you zoom into 100%, you can see where some of the image starts to fall apart. The details in the dock as well as the water get extremely mushy, and you can see there's a ton of noise reduction going on. However, looking at the brighter areas like the trees and the buildings, they look significantly sharper than the water. I don't see any visible noise or grain, so I guess that's the compromise of achieving a clean night shot. Now this next one is of the same location, but using the 5x telephoto, and immediately you can see a lot more noise, especially noticeable in that gray building in the middle of the frame. So for this shot, I guess the algorithm opted for more clarity than noise reduction, because the details are definitely retained and you can still read that stop sign. This next image is one of my favorites of the night because it looks the most natural. You can still see some clouds and color in the sky, but it's nowhere near as bright as the previous shots. The buildings are all sharp, and you can even make out the people sitting at the end of the dock. The telephoto is great for these night shots when it's able to switch to it successfully, but keep in mind that if it's too dark or if the conditions aren't right, it won't actually use that 5x lens. Lastly, I want to take a look at some RAW files, specifically for the ultrawide. This is the JPEG of the ultrawide brick shot, and pay attention to the RAW file as I switch to it. Lightroom automatically applies a profile correction to the file, but you can see it is still significantly wider than the JPEG. Here's another example with the ultrawide JPEG first, and when I switch to the RAW file, you can see the original file briefly before it applies the profile correction. This is probably why the ultrawide photos are so impressive with minimal corner smearing, because the processed JPEG that you get out of the device is already cropping out those extreme corners where you get the most of the image degradation. And speaking of RAW, I usually love to shoot RAW in order to edit my files in post. But honestly, when you're shooting with the Pixel, there's so much processing magic going on that you can just use those JPEGs right out of the device. Alright, so I am really impressed with the Pixel 7 Pro. Google has taken that software and hardware integration to the next level. Some of the software features are fun and useful, and I definitely want to continue testing that 2x option because it's one of the focal lengths that I use the most. As far as the hardware goes, it feels incremental coming from the Pixel 6 series, but it definitely does feel more refined and elegant. Unfortunately, it's still a relatively big device, and I personally just hope that manufacturers would start making more compact flagships. However, I know a lot of people like the bigger display, and on the Pixel 7 Pro, it's bright and beautiful for media consumption. Alright, so that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Will you be upgrading to the Pixel 7 series? And let me know your thoughts on that 2x zoom. Do you think Google should have just put an actual 2x sensor and lens in there instead? And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, because I'll be reading through all of them and making follow-up videos about this phone and comparing it to the Samsung S22 Ultra as well as the Pixel 6 Pro. So if you haven't already, definitely subscribe so you don't miss those videos when they come out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.